Hi there, I'm Beth, and today I'll be assembling and fully customizing a smart doll as a commission for one of my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. I had let my patrons know that I had a green pear smart doll kit quite a while ago, and that I'd be open to customizing her as a commission. One of my patrons got in touch right away and asked if I'd consider turning her into Fiona from Shrek for her. Her daughter played Fiona in her senior year high school musical, and she did such a stellar job, she felt it was one of her proudest parenting moments. So to commemorate her performance, I of course agreed to take on the commission. Now, I couldn't possibly compare myself to the talented team over at Smart Doll, but I must acknowledge that they already have made their own cosplay version of Fiona. Now, I'm not going to be trying to copy their version, but I will simply be referencing stills from the film and will be working on her in my own way. My patrons also got an exclusive video of me cutting and assembling all the Sofubi parts for this green pear girl. I purchased her from another creator, and the internal skeleton was already fully customized by Smart Doll themselves, so it was only the outer shell that I needed to assemble. Here's the inspiration board I created to share with my patron, showing the existing Smart Doll cosplay I mentioned, and pictures from her daughter's musical performance, as well as some accessory references and screenshots from the films. I also noted the wig I ordered for her, and some notes on how we might create and attach her crown and ears at the end, for the best ease of transport and for being able to package them for postage. I also ordered a dark green fabric, which looks really blue on camera here. And some gold ribbon to use as the trim for her bodice. The wig arrived fairly quickly and is the perfect colour for her, so it just needs to be trimmed and styled. With her wig on, I sketched up a little face-up concept art to share with my customer too. The first thing I really got stuck into though was making her shoes. I did start out with an idea that unfortunately didn't pan out, but I think it could work for a different project. Using the 3D printed last and soles from Smart Doll, I patterned out a foam template and a template for stretchy fabric, and I planned to layer them up, gluing a stretchy lining layer directly onto the cardboard sole first. Then gluing the foam template over this to add more structure, bringing the edges of the lining round to the outside for a neat finish, and finally gluing a velvet layer over the outside, bringing the edges under the sole as well. With trimmed and tucked edges, I could then place the shoe upper into the 3D printed sole. But as you can see, the style of the shoe just looks wrong being this oversized. It works fine for the boots that they make, but I think for a slip-on shoe, it needs to be much closer to the doll's actual foot size. Fortunately, I've already created a free downloadable sewing pattern for this type of shoe, and so I'll go ahead and make it using the stretch velvet and white jersey for the lining layer. I haven't sewed with velvet in a long time, but I'm very aware that the directional pile will want to push the other fabric along as you sew. So here I'm sewing a running stitch all the way outside my stitch line to hold the fabrics together when I take them to the machine. Here that's done, and I can remove the temporary stitches, trim the excess, and turn the shoe upper right side out. The shoe upper will be joined at the back seam by hand before being attached to the sole. Fiona's soles are cut from thick card and layered onto green felt, and I trim away the excess, leaving just 1 or 2 millimeters around the edge. I can then use lots of tiny stitches to join the sole and the upper together. To give the soles some more structure, I cut shapes from this textured foam that I can stack up to create a small heel, and finally finish off with a very narrow ribbon around the join. I think they look absolutely adorable and will suit her very well. Next, I moved on to creating the pattern for her skirt. I will be making Fiona's dress in 2 parts, so that hopefully she'll get a nice smooth appearance where the 2 parts meet. Drafting the skirt was simple enough, transferring her measurements to paper and creating a 3-part skirt that swoops out a little towards the bottom. Again, I temporarily baste stitch the seams before taking them to the machine. And I'll show you on this sample piece here why it's not a good idea to iron your seams on velvet. Even if you press on the back of the fabric, the heat from the iron will crush the pile on the right side, leaving very obvious marks. So this is why I knew I needed to either top stitch or leave my seams as I went along. I did another test and found that I really didn't like the look of top stitching on the right side of the fabric unless it was just for the skirt's bottom hem. So I stuck with a simple seam with overlocked edges on the inside for the majority of the skirt. I created a simple rolled over waistband with an overlap at the back and designed the skirt to leave a space for the Smart Doll's stand port. To avoid top stitching or any ugly seams, I finished the inside of her waistband by hand stitching the tucked edge. I got a fun camera holder with the ability to follow your face around, so I was trying it out here as I stood and hand stitched the skirt. Here the skirt is test fitted before it was hemmed and then closed up in the back, leaving a space for the stand. For the bodice part of Fiona's dress, I thought it might be a good idea to use the Pear Nice t-shirt pattern as a starting point, since the velvet I'm using for her dress has some stretch to it, just like a t-shirt. I would have to alter the front and back necklines and draft a long sleeve. Here I measured the existing arm's eye to help me draft a new sleeve, which has a pointed cuff angled slightly towards the front of the sleeve. Here I've finished drafting my pieces with a deep plunge at the back of the dress and a square neckline at the front. I cut out some test pieces in the green velvet with some white jersey facing pieces and put together a test of this bodice. It looked fairly good in the front neckline, but it needed to be shorter at the bottom, and I needed to make the plunging back a little narrower as well. I made the necessary alterations and cut some new velvet pieces. Next up was a pretty big part of the process, figuring out how to replicate the rose and vine pattern on her bodice. With some scrap velvet, I tested out hand embroidering the designs with a metallic gold embroidery thread. and I absolutely hated the results of this. The thread is far too thin, and because it's metallic, it's really bouncy as well, and it doesn't want to sit flat. So as a method of filling in shapes, it really wasn't going to work. I looked through my other embroidery threads, trying to find a decent non-metallic match for the gold trim, and I tried out another couple of shapes with the regular thread, but I really wasn't happy with how that looked either. I really thought that to be able to replicate the detail of the roses and the vines at the smaller scale of the Smart Doll, I would be better off hand painting the design using a gold metallic fabric paint. I ended up using a textile medium mixed with gold paint, although I did some tests with a buttermilk yellow paint as well. I referenced a cosplay outfit to get a clear look at the pattern, and then used a drawing program to draw out a whole bunch of the roses and vines for myself to reference when hand painting. I started out by very carefully drawing the design onto the velvet using a narrow white paint pen. The velvet pile is hard to draw on, so mostly these are made up from little dots. While I work on this, let me give a big thank you and welcome to Jane K, my newest supporter over on Patreon, and a huge thanks to all of my supporters over there. Mixing this metallic paint with textile medium helps to retain its flexibility once dry, and it effectively turns it into a fabric paint. I painted the designs, letting them all dry fully before returning again for a second coat, giving them all a nice clean edge and a bold gold colour. I have just finished painting 2 or 3 hours worth of fabric paint gold swirly patterns onto Fiona's bodice. Oh, my back. But it looks like it was worth it. It does look really good. Don't you agree? I think that painted design really works the best at this scale. And when I put it together and add the gold trim, I think it'll look brilliant. I joined the bodice at the shoulders and I insert the sleeves, overlocking the seam and hand stitching the seam allowance towards the shoulder. When turned right side out, this will help to keep the seam allowance tucked in, giving us a nice, neat shoulder line. Using the template pieces, I drafted a one-piece facing to use. Once made, I stitch it round the neckline of the bodice, trim it and turn it towards the inside. Here it's partly hand stitched into place before I add the gold trim, but I'm going to do that after closing in the bodice sides. Once closed, I will hem the bottom seam. Here I've started to hand stitch and add the gold trim round the neckline and the bottom of the bodice. I'm using this gold thread and I'm showing how easily it separates and frays. It's also a little difficult to use. I think it looks really good on the bodice though, so I'll carry on hand stitching the rest while the snow piles up outside. I had to then wait for the snow to melt enough to reach our shed so that I could spray on an MSC base layer for Fiona's head so I could do the face up. I was able to test out my pencils and pastels on a scrap piece of green vinyl, helping me decide which colours to use. I used a tiny applicator and pastels to blush her lips refining the edge with a kneaded putty eraser. I use a larger soft brush to apply a little green to her cheeks and a dark green pencil to add some detailing around her mouth and the start of her eye makeup. I kept the shapes fairly simple and built them up in green pencil before adding more shading and detail in subsequent layers. I was able to use a tiny brush and watercolour pencil to get some light paint strokes in her eyebrows, and also to add more detail to her mouth and lips. I built up more layers of colour, eventually adding freckles and highlights. I really think she has a beautiful face, and I especially love her freckles. I moved on to making a few pairs of eyes, from which I could choose one favourite set to use for Fiona. I cast bases using UV resin tinted white, building up layers of colour using paint pens and tiny brushes. Eventually adding layers of resin, a little glitter to catch the light, and adding the pupils too. I tried each pair that I made in her head and ultimately chose the pair I felt were the brightest and the most pretty. At this point, I returned to the wig, knowing that I needed to remove quite a lot of the bulk before I could do the pleat in the back. I clipped up the front section of the wig and the top, and then systematically worked through the wefts, trimming the bulk of the back of the wig away. This removed tremendous amount of hair, and I was able then to bring the twists at either side of her head together with the remaining long hair and create her single pleat in the back. The last components remaining for Fiona's full outfit were her crown, necklace, and ogre ears. My very kind and patient husband 3D modelled the crown from scratch using reference I gave him, and we decided it would be best to attach it using a magnet, with the matching magnet positioned underneath the wig. He also 3D modelled her ogre ears, using the difficult to attach elf ear design as its base. We printed some test pieces in this flesh coloured filament and were delighted with how well the ears and crown worked. So he printed the final versions of each using resin, which I gently sanded down before painting. We printed duplicates just in case of any breakages, and I gave the crowns an all-over coat of metallic gold. The ogre ears were given a base of green and were better colour matched with her skin tone in subsequent layers. I finished off the crowns with some pretty green diamond gems and installed their magnets. Fiona's ears will be helped to stay in place with some putty. I also made Fiona a very delicate necklace with a green heart gem at the bottom using gold embroidery thread and 2 flat-backed gems. I thought this was very pretty, and I actually took her pictures and final shots wearing this necklace. However, I then remembered that I had a little container of Swarovski crystals, and I wondered if I could make her a less screen-accurate necklace, but perhaps one that looked a little more substantial. I'll leave it up to her new owner to decide which one she keeps, but I do think the crystal necklace looks even prettier on her. So with that, let me say a final thank you to all of you for watching, and to my patrons for their deeply appreciated support. I do have my commissions closed at the moment to allow me to focus on getting through my existing queue. So if you're interested in commissioning a custom doll of any type for yourself in the future, then please follow the link in the description and follow me for free on Patreon. Once I've reopened my commissions again, I will announce it there in a public post, so you'll be the first to know when they're available. For now, I'm really looking forward to each and every custom doll in my queue, and I really hope you enjoyed watching this beautiful smart doll Fiona come together. I'm sure her new owner will be delighted to have her home, but I would love to know, what was your favourite part of today's project? Leave me your answer in a comment below, and please consider liking the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye! Fiona's ears will be helped to stay in place with some